2,000 years before our time, when the marble temples of Athens still caught the sun like fire, a silence had begun to creep across Greece. The gods no longer spoke at Delphi. The poets no longer sang of heroes. And the people of Athens, once the voice of freedom itself, now whispered in fear of Macedonian kings. Among those quiet streets walked a young scholar named Nikandros. He was 24 years old, the son of a stonemason, and a student of philosophy at the academy. To strangers he looked like any other student, tunic dusty with chalk, scrolls under one arm. But his mind was restless, filled with questions that even his teachers feared to ask. He had grown up hearing stories of the Persian Wars, of Leonidas at Thermopylae and Themistocles at Salamis. But now he saw only foreign soldiers patrolling the same streets where Socrates once spoke. The Athens of ideas had become the Athens of silence. That morning, as dawn broke over the Acropolis, Nikandros climbed the marble steps of the old Parthenon. He looked down at the agora below, the marketplace where democracy had been born, and he whispered to himself, "How long can a city live after its spirit is gone?" A voice answered behind him. It was his mentor, Philostratos, an aging philosopher who had once studied under Aristotle himself. Philostratos said softly, "A city dies when men prefer comfort to truth." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Remember that, Nikandros. It may save your soul when it can no longer save your country." Later that day, Nikandros attended the last open meeting of the assembly. The hall that had once thundered with debate now held only a few dozen citizens. At the podium stood a Macedonian official reading decrees from the new regent in Pella. Each law stripped Athens of another breath of freedom. When an old orator dared to protest, the soldiers' spears tapped the floor in warning, and the man fell silent. Nikandros felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. This was not the city his teachers had described. This was a kingdom pretending to be a republic. That evening, in the dim courtyard of the academy, the students gathered around a lamp as Philostratos spoke of the world beyond Greece. "Alexander is dead," he said, "and the empire he built is cracking like pottery. His generals will tear it apart. Asia will burn, and the gods will laugh." He turned to Nikandros. "Someone must write the truth of these days before the victors write their lies." And so began the idea that would shape Nikandros' life, a journey across the dying Greek world to record its last breath. Before he could leave, he went one last time to the Piraeus, the harbor where ships from every nation still came to trade. The air smelled of salt and olive oil. Sailors shouted in half a dozen tongues. There he met Thrasylos, a veteran of the old wars, his left eye clouded white from a scar. Thrasylos was selling cheap pottery, but his back was straight and his voice carried the weight of command. When Nikandros told him of his plan to travel, the veteran laughed. "You want to chase ghosts? Then start with Thebes," he said. "That's where freedom died." He pointed north, toward the hills. "I was there when Alexander came. Go and look upon what he left behind. Then tell me what you call philosophy." That night Nikandros lay awake listening to the distant surf. He remembered his father's words before he joined the academy. "Learn all you can, but do not forget to live." Now he wondered if living meant leaving. At dawn he packed a small satchel, parchment, ink, a bronze stylus, and one copy of Homer's Odyssey. He took the northern road out of Athens, past the olive groves of Attica, where the morning mist clung to the trees like spirits unwilling to depart. Behind him, the Parthenon gleamed one last time in the rising sun. Ahead lay the unknown. The road to Thebes wound through villages where the talk was of famine and taxes. Children played with wooden swords, shouting the names of heroes long dead. Old men muttered prayers to Zeus and Poseidon, though their temples stood empty. To the Greeks of that age, the world felt unmoored, like a ship adrift after the captain's fall. Nikandros recorded every story he heard in his journal, believing that one day someone would care to know what it had been like to live through the end of greatness. 3 days into his journey, he stopped at a small shrine carved into the rock of a mountain pass. There he met a wandering poet who carried no lyre, only a broken reed flute. They shared bread and wine beneath the stars. The poet said, "Once, men sang to please the gods. Now we sing to remind ourselves we are still men." Nikandros wrote the words down carefully. He did not yet realize they would become the opening line of his future book. When at last he reached the plain of Thebes, he found not a city but a grave. Stone foundations lay half-buried in weeds. Wild dogs roamed the ruins. Here and there, fragments of statues, an arm, a torso, a face without eyes, stared from the grass. Thrasylos had spoken the truth. Freedom had died here. Alexander had destroyed Thebes to make an example of rebellion, and even now, years after his death, no one had dared to rebuild. Nikandros walked among the ruins until dusk. He imagined the screams, the smoke, the clash of bronze on stone. And then, for the first time, he felt anger stronger than fear. He sat on a fallen column and opened his journal. "The city is silent," he wrote, "but the earth remembers. Each step echoes a story the conquerors could not erase." He dipped his stylus again. If Greece is to live, it must live in words. The wind rose, carrying the scent of rain. Thunder rolled across the hills. Nikandros closed the journal, looked east toward where the stars would soon rise, and whispered a prayer, not to the old gods, but to memory itself. Thebes lay before Nikandros like a scar carved into the earth. He had read of its destruction, but books could not capture the silence that lingered among its broken walls. The rain had begun, soft at first, whispering through the reeds that grew between toppled stones. Every droplet seemed to echo the tears of those who had once called this city home. Nikandros set up a small camp near what had once been the sacred way, using a fallen column as shelter. He lit a modest fire and opened his journal. By the flickering light, he drew the outline of the ruined city, noting where temples once stood, where markets had bustled, where laughter might have filled the air. Then, as night deepened, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Cartographers don't usually travel alone," the voice said. Nikandros turned sharply. Out from behind a broken arch stepped a man wrapped in a torn Macedonian cloak, a long scar cutting through his beard. He carried no weapon, only a walking stick, though his stance was that of a soldier. "I'm not a cartographer," Nikandros replied cautiously. "I'm a student of philosophy." The man chuckled. "Then you're twice a fool, wandering through the graves of soldiers to ask questions no one dares answer." He sat down beside the fire without invitation. "My name is Thrasylos," he said, the same name the veteran at the harbor had spoken. "I fought here when Alexander came. Or rather," he corrected, "I survived here." Nikandros studied him in silence. The man's eyes were distant, fixed on something invisible beyond the flames. After a moment, Thrasylos spoke again. "When the Macedonians surrounded the city, we still believed we could win. We had our walls, our pride, and our memory of what it meant to be free. But freedom is a fine word until hunger gnaws at your stomach and the screams of your children echo behind you." He gestured toward the dark ruins. "Alexander offered peace if we would bow. The council refused, so he gave us fire instead." His voice hardened. "I saw the temples burn. I heard the library collapse. Scrolls of wisdom turned to ash. And when the killing ended, the conqueror wept, not for the dead, but for the beauty he had destroyed. That was his kind of sorrow." The fire crackled. Nikandros felt his throat tighten. He wanted to ask why Thrasylos stayed here, in a place so haunted. But the answer came unbidden. The man had nowhere else to go. He was a relic, like the stones themselves. Thrasylos noticed his hesitation and smiled bitterly. "You study philosophy, yes? Then tell me, what does your Plato say about men like me?" Nikandros answered softly. "He says courage is knowing what not to fear." The veteran laughed, a harsh sound in the night. "Then tell your Plato that fear keeps men alive." They sat together until dawn. When the first light touched the hills, Thrasylos rose. "I'm heading east," he said. "There are Macedonian camps near Delphi. They pay silver for men who still remember how to hold a spear." He looked at Nikandros. "You have the eyes of a man who hasn't yet decided what he believes. If you want to understand Greece, don't listen to the philosophers. Listen to the soldiers who buried them." With that, he slung his cloak over his shoulder and walked into the mist. Nikandros watched him go, unsure if he had met a teacher or a warning. Later that morning, Nikandros wandered deeper into the ruins. He found a cracked wall still bearing a faint inscription in fading Greek. "Thebes will rise again when her children remember her name." He traced the letters with his fingers, feeling the grooves cut by hands now dust. It struck him that memory was the last form of resistance a dead city could offer. He began to speak aloud, as if dictating to the ghosts around him. "The Greeks built temples for their gods, theaters for their poets, and cities for their freedom. Now all three lie in ruin. Yet in ruin there is truth. Empires conquer stone, but they cannot conquer the idea that built it. He closed his journal and stood still, letting the wind dry the ink. From the distance came a sound, hooves on the road. A small group of riders approached, Macedonian scouts by their armor. Nikandros quickly hid behind the remains of a wall, heart pounding. He listened as the soldiers spoke. Their words carried across the open ground, careless and cruel. They spoke of Athens, of unrest, of whispers that the philosophers there were stirring rebellion again. One of them laughed. Let them talk. We have swords for every word. Then they rode on. When the dust settled, Nikandros stepped out and stared after them. He felt anger again, but this time it was not only for Thebes. It was for his own people, too, those who had surrendered their pride for safety. He realized that knowledge alone was not enough. To understand Greece, he must see the world that had replaced it. The world of Macedon, of generals and kings who spoke Greek but no longer thought like Greeks. He packed his things, doused the fire, and took one last look at Thebes. In the slanting morning light, the ruins almost seemed to breathe. He whispered a farewell. May your silence teach me what your voice once could. Then he turned his steps toward Delphi, where the oracle once spoke the will of the gods. He hoped that in the shadow of that mountain, he might hear an echo of meaning. The road to Delphi was long and steep. As he walked, he passed villages built from the stones of older shrines. Children played among the ruins, unaware that their homes stood atop the bones of their ancestors' glory. At one village well, an old woman offered him water. When he told her he sought wisdom, she laughed softly. Wisdom, she said. The only wisdom left is to survive. Her words followed him long after he left her behind. At dusk, Delphi appeared, perched high upon the slopes of Mount Parnassus, half hidden in mist. Even from afar, it seemed a place where the earth itself held its breath. But the smoke rising from its valley was not incense. It was the smoke of campfires. Macedonian banners fluttered among the ruins of the once sacred temple. The seat of prophecy had become a garrison. Nikandros stood at the edge of the ridge, staring in disbelief. The gods had truly fallen silent. And yet, somewhere in that silence, he felt a strange pull, as if the stones themselves were waiting to speak to him. He whispered, "If the gods are gone, then let man be his own oracle." Then, tightening his cloak against the cold, he began his descent toward Delphi. Nikandros descended the steep path toward Delphi as evening bled into night. The air smelled of pine and wet stone. The oracle's sanctuary lay ahead, wrapped in mist, the once holy fires now replaced by the flicker of soldiers' camp lanterns. He could see them even from the ridge, Macedonian banners, crimson against the fog, and the faint echo of laughter. The laughter of men who no longer feared the gods. Delphi had once been the navel of the world, the place where mortals spoke with heaven. Now, it was a ruin like the rest. Broken columns leaned against the cliffs, and the great temple of Apollo stood cracked and hollow, its golden roof long stripped for war. The sacred spring still trickled nearby, but its waters were muddy, reflecting not the stars but torchlight and smoke. Nikandros crept down the path cautiously, keeping to the shadows. When he reached the lower terraces, he found small fires burning. Peasants, wanderers, and beggars now lived among the stones. They huddled beneath faded statues of gods who had once commanded empires. The air was filled with quiet murmurs, prayers half-whispered, not to be heard by soldiers. He passed a woman singing softly to her child in a tongue he didn't recognize. Her melody sounded like morning dressed as hope. As he entered the temple court, he saw a group of Macedonian mercenaries drinking wine beside what had once been the oracle's seat. One of them, red-haired and broad as a bull, was mocking the old rituals. He lifted his arms dramatically and shouted, "O mighty Apollo, tell us, shall I win my next battle, or will the dice cheat me first?" The others laughed. He grabbed a bowl of ashes and threw them into the air like an offering. The ashes drifted down onto the marble floor, gray snow falling on the bones of prophecy. Nikandros wanted to speak, to tell them they were defiling a sacred place, but he knew it would mean death. Instead, he slipped past quietly, deeper into the temple, where the air grew cool and still. There, In the shadows, he found a single figure kneeling before the cracked statue of Apollo. It was an old man in tattered robes, thin as parchment, a long beard streaked with white dust. He turned as Nikandros approached, and his eyes gleamed like polished glass. "You shouldn't be here," the old man said. "I seek wisdom," Nikandros answered. "And they say Delphi once gave it." The man gave a dry laugh. "Once. Now it gives only echoes." He rose slowly, leaning on a wooden staff. "You're not the first to come asking. They all come with questions about power, about destiny, about the gods. But the gods stopped answering long ago." He walked toward the remains of the sacred tripod, the seat where priestesses once inhaled fumes and spoke visions. Only a cracked bronze base remained, blackened with age. The old man knelt beside it and whispered, almost tenderly, "Once, this was the voice of the world. Kings trembled before its words. Now even the wind speaks louder." Nikandros stepped closer. "Were you the priest here?" The man nodded. "I was the last keeper of Apollo's fire. When the soldiers came, they took the gold, the wine, and the sacred scrolls. They told me I could stay if I swept the floor." His voice shook with tired laughter. "So I sweep the dust of gods." The two men sat together on the cracked stone floor as the night deepened. The priest spoke of the past, the great festivals, the sacred games, the endless pilgrims who had come from across the world to ask their questions. And then he spoke of the end. "The god's voice grew weaker each year," he said. "Perhaps it was not the god who grew silent, but men who stopped listening." Nikandros looked around the dark temple. "If the gods are silent, then who guides us?" The old priest smiled faintly. "That, my son, is what it means to be human. We were children once, and the gods were our parents. Now we have grown, and they have left us to choose our own ruin." Outside, a distant shout broke the silence. The soldiers were arguing, their laughter turning to violence. A clay jug shattered. The old man sighed. "Every age thinks itself wise, until it burns its own temples." He took Nikandros's hand and placed a small bronze coin in his palm. Worn smooth, the image of Apollo almost faded away. "Take this," he said. "It once opened the temple gates. Now it opens nothing, but it remembers." Nikandros bowed his head. "What should I do with it?" "Keep it," the priest said. "And when you write of this age, remind those who come after that even silence can be holy." As dawn began to creep through the shattered roof, Nikandros stepped outside. The mist rolled over the valley, soft and pale, hiding the soldiers' camp below. He could hear the faint bells of goats in the distance, and the first cry of a hawk circling high above. He looked at the bronze coin in his hand and felt its cold weight. It was nothing, and yet it was history, condensed into metal and memory. He wrote in his journal, "I came to hear the voice of the gods, but found instead the voice of men pretending not to need them. Perhaps the divine never left us. It merely waits for us to speak first." He closed the book and began to walk eastward again. A caravan road wound through the Parnassus valleys, leading toward Thessaly and the lands beyond. He had heard that veterans of Alexander's armies were gathering there, selling their swords to whoever could pay. Men who had walked with kings and seen the edge of the world. If wisdom no longer lived in temples, perhaps it lingered among those who had conquered them. Before he left Delphi, he turned one last time to the temple. The sun rose behind it, painting the broken pillars gold. For a fleeting moment, it looked as if Apollo had returned. Then the light shifted, and all was gray again. Nikandros whispered to the wind, "If there are no gods, then let memory be divine." Then he tightened his cloak and began his journey north, toward men who had traded faith for empire. Nikandros followed the caravan road east, a thin ribbon of dust winding through the mountains. Merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers all traveled this same path, each chasing something they could not name. Some sought fortune, some forgiveness, some only distance from the ghosts behind them. For Nikandros, it was truth. 3 days beyond Delphi, he caught sight of a column of men marching slowly toward the plains of Thessaly. Their shields were mismatched, their spears scarred, their banners frayed. They were veterans of Alexander's wars, men who had crossed deserts, rivers, and kingdoms, only to return to a homeland that no longer existed. Their leader, a weathered captain named Antigonos, rode a black horse at the head of the column. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, and his armor was patched with Persian silk. Nikandros approached him at dusk, offering bread and wine in greeting. "I am a scholar from Athens," he said, "traveling to record the stories of those who saw the world." Antigonos studied him for a long moment, then smiled beneath a gray beard. "Then you'll find no shortage of stories among us. But be warned, we tell them better than we live them." That night the veterans made camp by a ruined fountain. The firelight danced across their faces, some young, some old, all marked by the same weary pride. They spoke little at first, content to listen to the crackle of flames and the wind whistling through their spears. At last one of them, a tall man with a scar down his cheek, began to hum a tune, a soldier's song from the Far East. Its words were half forgotten, its melody broken, but the sound carried the weight of home long lost. Nikandros asked them about Alexander, the conqueror whose name had become legend. The veterans laughed quietly. "Legend," Antigonos said, "is what you tell the children. Truth is what you drink to forget." Another veteran, a dark-haired soldier named Lycon, leaned forward. "I saw him in Egypt," he said. "The priests called him a god. He smiled and let them believe it. But when the sun went down, he wept like any man. He told us the gods were jealous of him, because he could die." The men nodded. Someone tossed another branch into the fire. The sparks rose like stars fleeing the earth. Nikandros listened as the stories unfolded. How Alexander's armies had crossed the scorching deserts of Persia. How they had burned cities and crowned kings. How they had marched until the sky itself seemed to collapse into sand and smoke. He heard of the siege of Tyre, the conquest of Babylon, the endless battles that blurred into one long heartbeat of war. Each tale shimmered with pride and regret. Antigonos said softly, "We thought we were building a new world. Instead, we only scattered the old one farther apart." He poked the fire with his sword tip. "The East swallowed us whole. When the king died, the empire cracked, and we fell out like stones from a jar." Nikandros asked, "Do you believe he was a god?" The captain smiled sadly. "No, he was a man who couldn't bear to be one." Silence settled again. The night stretched wide and starless. Nikandros took out his journal and wrote by firelight. "The men who conquered the world now conquer only the memories of it. They speak of glory, but their voices tremble with hunger." As dawn broke, the caravan prepared to move. Antigonos invited Nikandros to travel with them. They were heading east toward the old road to Babylon. "There's work there for scribes and thinkers," he said. "Kings always need someone to explain why they are right." Nikandros smiled faintly. "Then I will go, though I may not tell them what they wish to hear." The journey east was harsh. The summer sun beat down on armor that had forgotten war. At night the veterans told more stories, of strange lands where elephants fought like living towers, of rivers that gleamed with moonlight, of storms that sounded like the voice of Zeus himself. One spoke of India. "We reached the edge of the world," he said, and still he wanted more. He said he would find where the ocean ended. But when we refused to march farther, he wept again, not because we defied him, but because he feared he would never see an end to himself. Nikandros wrote these words carefully. He began to understand that history was not a tale of heroes and monsters, but of men trapped inside their own desires. One evening, the caravan reached a high ridge overlooking the plains of Asia Minor. Below them stretched an endless horizon, villages, rivers, the faint shimmer of distant cities. Antigonos dismounted and gazed eastward, silent for a long time. Finally he said, "There, beyond that light, lies Babylon. Alexander lies there too, encased in gold. We left him sleeping among strangers." He turned to Nikandros. "Go see it for yourself. Write what you find. But remember, a man becomes a legend only when no one dares to tell the truth about him." Nikandros thanked him and walked alone toward the valley. Behind him, the veterans lit their evening fires. The smoke rose like offerings to gods who no longer cared. As night fell, he reached a small shrine beside the road. It was new, built by Macedonians. On its stone altar stood a carving of Alexander with rays of the sun behind his head. Below, someone had scratched words in the marble. "The world has one master." Nikandros stared at it, then took out his stylus and added another line beneath. "And countless slaves." He felt a surge of quiet defiance. The age of philosophers might have ended, but the age of truth had not. He walked on through the dark, guided only by the pale glow of the eastern stars. Ahead waited Babylon, the heart of the empire, where kings played at gods and ideas drowned beneath gold. Weeks later, the plain of Babylon opened before Nikandros like a mirage of bronze and smoke. The city shimmered beneath the sun, vast walls stretching to the horizon, towers glittering with glazed tiles the color of the sea. He had read of it in Homer's Echoes, in Herodotus's Numbers, the heart of the East, the city of gods and kings. Now it was the capital of an empire without a master. Alexander was dead. His generals ruled in his name, each claiming to protect what they meant to possess. The banners above Babylon bore different symbols, a dozen suns for a single fallen one. Merchants filled the streets, soldiers drank in the courtyards, and philosophers argued beneath palm trees beside the canals. It was wealth without order, faith without direction. Nikandros entered through the Ishtar Gate, its blue bricks still shining though chipped by war. He felt small among the lions and dragons painted on the walls. In the market he saw Greek silver, Persian spices, Egyptian linen, and scrolls written in tongues he could not read. It was as if the whole world had been melted and poured into this single bowl. He rented a room above a scribe's shop near the Euphrates. By night, the river's surface reflected torchlight like molten gold. From his window, he could see the massive ziggurat, black against the stars, and the palace where Alexander had breathed his last. They said the room was still sealed. No one entered without permission. One morning a messenger arrived, bearing a seal of ivory carved with a lion's head. It summoned Nikandros to the palace. He was escorted through marble corridors lined with statues of the conqueror. Alexander's face repeated again and again, frozen in youth. In a high hall sat the regent Perdiccas, one of Alexander's generals. He was tall, proud, his armor engraved with scenes of victory. Around him gathered scribes, ambassadors, and mercenaries waiting for orders. Perdiccas gestured toward Nikandros. "They tell me you are a writer from Athens. You record history, yes?" "I try to record truth," Nikandros replied. The general smiled. "Truth is a matter of command. You will write of the empire, that it endures, that the king still lives in spirit." He leaned forward. "Babylon needs faith more than honesty." Nikandros bowed slightly. "And if honesty is the only faith left?" The hall went quiet. Perdiccas's expression hardened. "You are bold for a philosopher," he said. "Boldness fills graves faster than ink. Write what I tell you, and you will have gold and safety. Write otherwise, and you will have only an audience of worms." That night Nikandros returned to his room shaken but unbroken. He looked out across the city, torches along the canals like stars fallen to earth. He thought of Athens, of his teacher Philostratos' warning that truth and power could never share a cup. He dipped his stylus in ink and began. In Babylon the world gathered to mourn a god, and discovered it had created a machine instead. Days became weeks. He spoke with soldiers, traders, and slaves. Each told a different version of Alexander's death. One swore he was poisoned, another said fever, another whispered that he simply refused to live after realizing he could conquer no more. In every story, Alexander was larger than the men who survived him. Nikandros saw how legend was built, not by poets, but by those who feared silence. One evening, he was invited to a gathering in the gardens of the palace. There he met Roxana, Alexander's widow. She was veiled, her voice calm, her eyes like obsidian mirrors. Around her moved servants carrying trays of wine and fruit from every province. Roxana asked, "You are from Athens, the land of philosophers. Tell me, why do your people worship ideas more than men?" Nikandros answered, "Because ideas cannot die." She smiled faintly. "And yet they starve as easily as people when no one defends them." She led him to a marble fountain, its water scented with myrrh. "I am a queen in name only," she said quietly. "They keep me alive because I remind them of him. Soon they will tire of remembrance." Her gaze turned to the horizon. "Write what you wish, Athenian. But know this, every empire ends not in battle, but in forgetting." That night the city trembled with rumor. 2 generals had drawn swords in the council hall. By dawn, the courtyards ran red. Babylon's empire was devouring itself. From his window, Nikandros watched the fires spreading, the shouts of soldiers echoing against the palace stones. He understood now what his teacher meant. Truth was not slain by tyrants. but by chaos wearing the tyrant's crown. When the fighting ended, Perdiccas was dead. His own men turned against him. The victors proclaimed another regent within hours. Nothing had changed except the names. Nikandros walked the streets the next morning. The stench of smoke and blood mingled with incense. Merchants reopened their stalls as if war were only weather. A child ran past him carrying a wooden carving of Alexander, its head broken off. The symbol was too perfect to ignore. He sat by the river, dipped the bronze coin from Delphi into the water, and watched ripples distort Apollo's fading face. Then he wrote, "Empires do not die when their kings fall. They die when men cease to believe the truth is worth the price of speaking." That night he packed his satchel. The scroll he had written would not please any king. It would please only history. He paid a boatman 2 silver drachmas to carry him down the Euphrates toward the sea. As the oars dipped into the dark current, he looked back at Babylon, towers glowing like embers, reflections trembling on the water. He whispered to himself, "The gods are silent, the kings are deaf, but the river still remembers." The boat slid into the night, carrying him westward. Above, the stars hung motionless, like the eyes of forgotten gods watching a world that no longer prayed. Months passed before the ship touched Greek shores again. Nikandros stepped onto the docks of Piraeus and smelled salt and smoke, the scent of a city preparing for war. Banners fluttered over the harbor, not with the insignia of Macedon, but with the owl of Athena. Whispers rippled through the crowds. "The Lamian war has begun." He walked the long road toward the city gates. Every milestone he passed was guarded by men with spears of different lengths, armor mismatched, faces young and unshaven. Not the disciplined hoplites of old, but volunteers, tradesmen, poets, farmers, each carrying more hope than skill. They saluted him, thinking his scholar's robes marked him as a messenger from the gods of wisdom. He returned their nods in silence, feeling unworthy of their faith. Inside the walls, Athens throbbed with feverish purpose. Smithies hammered through the night. Women carried stones to strengthen barricades. Children chased each other through streets, echoing with chants of freedom. It was the old spirit, reborn in desperation. And yet, beneath the shouts of courage, Nikandros heard the whisper of hunger. Grain was scarce, gold scarcer, but pride was abundant. In the agora, he found a crowd gathered around a wooden platform. On it stood a man he recognized from his youth, Hyperides, the orator who had once defied Macedon with words sharper than swords. Time had bent his back, but not his fire. "Shall we live forever under foreign masters?" he thundered. "Did Leonidas stand at Thermopylae so we might kneel to Macedonian governors?" The crowd roared. Even the wind seemed to answer. When his speech ended, Hyperides spotted Nikandros at the edge of the throng and beckoned him forward. "So the wanderer returns," the old orator said, gripping his hand. "They told me you were writing history in the East." "I was," Nikandros answered. "Now I fear I must live it." Hyperides smiled sadly. "Then take up your pen, or your shield. We will need both." He led Nikandros through narrow alleys to a courtyard where soldiers drilled under the fading light. At their head stood Leosthenes, a general whose name had begun to spread across Greece like the spark of a flame. Leosthenes greeted him warmly. "I've read your teacher's essays," he said. "Fine thoughts, but useless unless given iron." He tossed Nikandros a short sword. "Can you fight?" "I can learn," Nikandros replied. "Good," said the general. "Philosophy can wait. Freedom cannot." That night, from the walls of the Acropolis, Nikandros looked out over the flickering fires of the Macedonian camp. The enemy had already surrounded the city. Their siege engines stood like dark trees against the horizon. He remembered the ruins of Thebes and felt the weight of prophecy pressing on his chest. Yet for the first time in years, he also felt belonging. Athens was wounded, dying perhaps, but she was his. He spent the next days carrying messages between the lines, recording troop movements, listening to the rhythm of hope and despair. He saw boys become men in a single heartbeat, men become ghosts before the sun set. Each death, he wrote, was a sentence in the book of Greece's final chapter. One evening Hyperides summoned him again. The old man's face was drawn, but his eyes were alive. "Write everything you see," he said. "Someday, when none of us remain, let the world know that we did not go quietly." Nikandros hesitated. Do you believe we can win? The orator smiled. Win? No. But victory and dignity are not the same thing. Outside, thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from catapults hurling stone. The siege had begun. Flaming rocks arced through the darkness, trailing sparks like falling stars. The Parthenon's columns shook, statues of Athena cracked, but did not fall. Citizens cheered each impact as though defiance itself were a weapon. Nikandros worked through the night, tending the wounded beside philosophers who quoted Socrates between screams. He learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else mattered more. When dawn came, the city still stood, and so did its people. Days blurred into one another. Each sunrise brought new smoke. Each night, the same prayers. The Macedonians tightened their ring around the city until even the gulls stopped crossing the walls. Bread was gone, then oil, then mercy. Nikandros walked the streets recording fragments of voices. Mothers bartering jewelry for handfuls of grain. Children pretending the thunder of siege engines was applause for heroes. Every note he wrote felt like carving epitaphs for the living. In the council hall, Leosthenes still spoke of courage, his hands raw from lifting stones. Every hour we hold, he said, is one more heartbeat for Greece. Hyperiades stood beside him, coughing between sentences, but smiling all the same. The gods love men who refuse to surrender, he whispered. Nikandros wanted to believe him. That evening the rain began. Lightning forked above the Acropolis, and the Macedonians moved their engines closer under its cover. When the first wall cracked, the sound was like the shattering of the world. Flaming arrows hissed through the rain. Rooftops bloomed with fire. Nikandros ran with buckets from one blaze to the next until his arms trembled. He saw Leosthenes on the rampart, shouting orders, his armor streaked with soot. A catapult stone struck near him. The general vanished in a cloud of dust and smoke. When it cleared, only the banner remained. By dawn the news had spread. Leosthenes was dead. The men still fought, but the rhythm of their shouts had changed. It was no longer the chant of defiance. It was the sound of men holding back despair. Hyperiades summoned Nikandros to the Parthenon. The philosopher's hands shook as he wrote his final speech on a scrap of parchment. If they take me, he said, they will cut out my tongue so I cannot speak. So I give my words to you instead. He pressed the parchment into Nikandros's hand. Keep them safe. A single sentence can outlive a city. Outside, the gates gave way. The Macedonian phalanx advanced through the smoke, shields glinting like scales of a metal serpent. Nikandros fled through narrow alleys with other survivors, clutching the parchment to his chest. He saw citizens throwing stones from rooftops until arrows silenced them. He saw priests sheltering children beneath broken altars. Athens was burning, and still the people sang, hoarse, trembling, but singing the old hymn to Athena. The melody rose above the crackle of flames like the ghost of a nation refusing to die. Near the docks, he met a band of wounded soldiers retreating toward the sea. They carried no standards now, only the ashes of them. One recognized him and called out, "Scholar, write this. Tell them we stood." Then the man fell, and Nikandros could not tell if he was dead or only resting. At the water's edge, ships waited under a gray dawn. The last defenders guided refugees aboard as arrows hissed into the surf. Nikandros turned once more toward the city. Through the smoke, he could see the Acropolis glowing like a coal, the statue of Athena headless but still upright. He whispered a line from his teacher. The body may fall, but the idea must stand. As the boat pushed off, he opened Hyperides' parchment and read the last words written in a trembling hand. Freedom is not a place, but a memory carried by those who refuse to forget. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his journal. The sea swallowed the sound of the city behind him. Only the wind remained, carrying the faint scent of burning olive wood, a requiem for philosophy and for home. Weeks became months. The ship that carried Nikandros drifted south along the coasts of Crete, then west to the mouth of the Nile. Every night he dreamed of Athens, streets paved with ash, the statue of Athena staring headless into an empty sky. He woke each morning to the cry of gulls and the creak of wood, unsure if he was escaping or merely continuing the fall. When at last he reached the delta, the world changed. The air was thicker, the sun harsher, the river alive with color. boats of papyrus and cedar sliding between fields of gold. Here, in Egypt, the Greeks were conquerors and guests at once. Alexander had founded a city upon the sea and named it for himself, Alexandria, the new jewel of the world. Nikandros walked its marble streets in awe. Temples to Greek gods rose beside shrines to Egyptian ones. The voices of traders mingled with the chants of priests. Everything smelled of salt, ink, and ambition. This was not the Greece he had left behind. It was something stranger, larger, a new civilization, half-born from the corpse of the old. He followed the crowds to a great building still under construction, walls of white limestone, pillars carved with both Greek letters and hieroglyphs. A young worker told him its name with pride, the Library of Alexandria. Inside, scrolls lay stacked by the thousands, brought from every corner of the known world. Here, knowledge was treasure, guarded not by swords but by scribes. Nikandros asked permission to enter. The keeper, a man called Callimachus, studied him closely. "You look like one who has lost more than he seeks," he said. "I have lost a country," Nikandros answered. "Then perhaps you will find a world," replied the keeper, and he let him in. The air smelled of parchment and cedar oil. Rows of desks stretched into the shadows, each lit by a single lamp. Men copied, translated, argued. In one corner, an old Egyptian philosopher lectured to students from India and Cyprus alike. "The gods are many," he said, "but truth is one, written in a language no temple owns." Nikandros sat among them, silent, listening. He realized that Greece had not truly died. It had simply spread, dissolving into the larger sea of human thought. Its freedom lived now not in armies or assemblies, but in questions. Days turned into weeks. He spent his mornings helping catalog new scrolls, his nights writing his own. Sometimes he would climb to the roof to watch the lighthouse flame burn against the dark horizon. Beneath it, ships came and went, carrying papyrus, grain, stories. The empire moved, restless, unstoppable. And yet, in this place of learning, time felt still. One evening, he met an Egyptian scholar named Neith, whose eyes shone like polished obsidian. She showed him the hall where sacred texts of every faith were kept side by side. "Your Alexander conquered with swords," she said, "but this place conquers with memory." Nikandros smiled. "Then may this be the only empire that lasts." They talked long into the night about philosophy, the soul, and the nature of history. At last Neith said, "Do you still believe your gods are silent?" He thought of Delphi's empty temple, of the old priests sweeping dust. "No," he answered quietly. "I think they learned a new language, ours." Months later, news reached Alexandria that Macedonian generals were still fighting for Alexander's throne. New kings rose and fell, cities burned. To the scholars, these were distant storms. "Every age has its thunder," Callimachus told him, "but lightning never strikes the mind." Still, Nikandros felt a stirring inside him. He had written of ruins and silence, of faith and empire, but not yet of rebirth. He decided to travel once more, deep into the desert, to the ancient temple of Siwa, where Alexander himself had once been declared divine. Perhaps there, he thought, he might find an answer not written on parchment. The journey took him through endless sand. Days burned, nights froze. At times he saw mirages, columns rising from dunes, the faces of old friends in the heat. At last he reached the oasis, a circle of green cradled by gold. The temple stood half buried, its inscriptions faded. Inside, only wind spoke. He placed the bronze coin from Delphi on the altar and whispered, "You have traveled farther than your god ever dreamed." He closed his eyes. The silence was complete, but it was not empty. It was peace. He realized that wisdom did not live in temples or cities, but in the journey itself, in the act of remembering. When he returned to Alexandria, he carried only one new line for his scroll. "The wise man builds no walls around his truth. He lets the desert carry it where it will." He spent his final years by the harbor, teaching children to read. Sometimes sailors asked about Greece, and he would smile sadly. "Greece is everywhere now," he said. "In the words you speak, in the questions you ask." Years slipped away like sand through an open hand. Nikandros grew old in the city of light. His hair turned the color of parchment, his eyes the hue of old bronze. but his hands still trembled with the need to write. He no longer searched for gods or kings. He sought only a sentence that could survive them both. Each morning he walked the harbor of Alexandria, watching the lighthouse flame die into dawn. Sailors from a dozen lands greeted him with the respect given to a kindly ghost. Children ran beside him asking for stories. He told them of an age when men argued with gods, when words were weapons and questions a kind of prayer. He never spoke of war. He had learned that the mind remembers wounds long after they stop bleeding. In his small room above the scriptorium, he kept 3 objects on his desk: the bronze coin from Delphi, the scrap of parchment with Hyperides' last words, and a smooth stone from the banks of the Euphrates. Each was a relic of a world already gone, yet together they felt alive, pulsing with memory. That winter he began his final work, a scroll he titled On the Nature of Power. He wrote, "Power is a fire. It gives warmth, it devours. It can forge iron or consume the hand that holds it. Wisdom is water. It yields, but it endures. Empires burn, rivers remain." He paused, listening to the sea beyond his window. He could almost hear Athens again, the hum of the agora, the hammer of the smiths, the voices of friends now dust. He smiled. Freedom was never a city, he murmured. It was a conversation. That night Neith visited him. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her steps slower, but her eyes still held the calm of the Nile. She placed a small lamp on his table. "When you are gone," she said, "this will keep your flame." He touched her hand. "Then let the flame belong to whoever finds it." They spoke until dawn about time, about truth, about whether the universe itself remembered. When she left, she looked back once and said, "You taught us that memory is the last temple. Guard it well." Spring came again. Nikandros grew weaker. He spent his final days dictating to students who gathered around his bed. He told them not to copy his words exactly. "Write them wrong," he said, smiling, "so that you must think to fix them. Only then will they be yours." On the last morning, he asked to be carried to the shore. The sea was calm, the horizon pale gold. He held the bronze coin in his palm and whispered, "Apollo, priest, teacher, may your silence never end." Then he gave the coin to the youngest student. "Keep it," he said, "and when you forget everything else, remember that I once believed the world could be understood." As the sun rose, he closed his eyes. The students thought he had fallen asleep, but he was already far away, walking again the road to Thebes, the olive groves of Attica, the sands of Siwa. Every step echoed with voices he had gathered across a lifetime. The soldier's laughter, the priest's whisper, the orator's cry, the child's question. The chorus swelled, not of mourning, but of continuation. They buried him on a hill above the harbor, where the wind carried both the scent of the sea and the dust of the desert. On his stone they carved only one line from his own hand. "Freedom is mortal. Wisdom is eternal." Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Alexandria's library burned, rebuilt, and burned again. The world changed its language, its gods, its maps. Yet fragments of Nikandros' writings survived, quoted by scholars who never knew his face. A few lines reached Rome, a few more traveled with monks to Byzantium, and one sentence found its way into a book copied in Florence 1,000 years later. The mind is the last frontier. Conquer it, and the world is free. No one remembered who had written it. Perhaps that was the truest victory. For Nikandros had always believed that ideas should outlive the names that carried them. And so his story ends where it began. A man with a pen, standing between silence and the need to speak. The Greece he loved was gone, but its spirit had become the seed of every question that followed. Wherever someone asks why, the voice of Nikandros still whispers from the dust.